the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Hello, Justin.
Hello, baseball fans, if you're listening.
Yeah.
Baseball season's well underway, but we thought what a perfect time in the middle of the summer to do probably our favorite sports movie of all time.
Easily, for me.
Major League from 1989. And we've kicked around the idea of this a couple years during the summer, and we never quite got to it. And we both did a rewatch recently when we were making a decision, and came to the realization of how much fun this movie is to watch, and would be a great conversation to have. So I'm so glad we're doing Major League for this episode.
Not just for sports fans. I mean, this is it might be a sports movie, but I feel like anybody can get into this.
Yeah, there's like so much camaraderie and spirit in this movie. I mean, there's a lot of brash humor, but at the same time, there's a lot of really hilarious moments. But yeah, as someone that, you know, I was a big baseball fan when I was a kid, but don't really follow sports that much anymore. You know, when the Cardinals are doing good, of course, I jump on the bandwagon. But somehow, man, I love sports movies. I don't follow sports, real sports, but there's very few sports movies that I dislike. But this is in my top 3 favorite sports movies of all time. As far as baseball movies go, definitely my favorite.
That time when you convinced me to watch Draft Day, and I was like, for real? Draft Day? Like football? Then I watched it and was like, okay, that movie was pretty decent.
I think there's always something interesting because the stakes are high, and it's easy to rally for an underdog, which this movie totally is, and then also seeing somebody put forth some effort and achieve something, you know, when the odds are stacked against them. I mean, I think that's a theme in so many movies where that idea works, and in this one specifically, the odds couldn't be stacked more against these guys who are just thought of as like the bottom of the barrel and then work their way to the very top before the movie's over.
Yeah, I think any uplifting story is going to attract every type of audience there is, and especially when you have an amazing cast like this ensemble piece. It feels like everyone was so tuned into their character. Or maybe that's just who they were, actually. Everyone embodies exactly who they are playing.
Yeah, when I think of comedic actors, Tom Berenger, Wesley Snipes, and Charlie Sheen never really come to mind, but They really work in this. And man, Wesley Snipes is hilarious and charming in this movie. And after watching this several times, I was like, man, why didn't Wesley Snipes do more comedic roles? I mean, I know White Man Can't Jump. He's funny in that, but like he's full on playing a little bit of a goofy character, but does it so well. And he's like so charming. And if anything, I wish there were more scenes with him in it, because every scene that he's in makes you kind of root for the movie a little bit more. With this being an ensemble cast, of course, one of our favorite things to talk about is the actors and how they get the parts for these movies. And I always love it when we do a movie that it's like a group effort, but also we'll really be getting into the origins of the movie, how this came together. And Lindsay, I know you've been really digging deep in some research, and there's a lot to talk about as far as like how the movie got its start, and the director, writer David S. Ward, and his love of baseball, and the reason why he wanted to do this movie in the first place, I think is very legitimate.
I had no idea until a week before recording that there was a book on this. Had I known that, I would have bought this book a long time ago, even before we decided to do this episode. So I didn't get all the way through it just because of life and trying to get, you know, everything together for this episode. But got about halfway through, and I'm totally planning on finishing that book.
Yeah, I was not aware of this book, so really good find on that. And what is the name of this book, if there's any listeners that want to check this out?
It's called The Making of Major League, Just a Bit Outside. Written by Jonathan Knight, and you can definitely tell that he is a fan of the movie. And there's so much material, interview material, and a lot of fun behind-the-scenes stories. And I'm kicking myself that I wasn't able to finish it before we were recording, but it's a great book so far.
I appreciate your effort in trying to get as much in as you can before the episode.
So along with the cast, Like Justin said, we'll talk about the origins, where the story came from. So we'll also be hitting on a little bit of the baseball boot camp that these actors went through, some filming tricks. There are some people in this movie that were better at baseball than others, but it was part of the casting process that you at least had to be good in some facet, either good at batting or you couldn't look like you didn't know how to play baseball, because everything in this movie, there's only one person that is doubled, and you would never know that they're doubled in this. And there's obviously no special effects. Everyone that's hitting is actually really hitting, so you had to have some skill behind it.
I know we found out a lot about that stuff when we did our episode on A League of Their Own, where it's just like trying to cast the players that look right, that also have some sort of credibility, but also have athleticism.
And that's kind of hard to find. Wesley Snipes looks like a real athletic guy, looks like a fast runner. We'll get to that later. We'll, of course, get to, how this movie fared after it was released. And let's see. Oh, sequels. We watched the sequels. We'll talk about that probably a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And after our discussions on Major League, our picks of the week, we stuck with our sports baseball theme. We both did baseball movies, which I kind of like. I thought it was nice to... I kind of was like pouring through maybe like 8 or 9 different baseball movies that, I'll talk about a little bit later. But ultimately landing on my pick of the week was the movie 61, which is about the Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle steadily approaching Babe Ruth's record of 60 home runs. They're trying to beat it. And also directed by superfan Billy Crystal. One of his few movies that he directed, and you can tell this movie was made with a lot of heart, but I'll get into that during that section. And your pick of the week was a baseball movie that I really like a lot, 8 Men Out.
And I had never seen this one. I don't know why. It escaped me. Great cast. True story about the Chicago White Sox from 1919 and a group of players on the team attempting to conspire to throw a World Series game.
I like that both of our picks are these true stories that took place in the past, but our feature is like this kind of goofy comedy sports baseball movie. It was a nice balance.
Yeah.
Well, as always, we'll round things out with our Murray moment. But before we get into our first clip, which this is one of the few movies we've had where it's like, man, there's so many good audio clips to use for this movie. I don't know what to choose from. But before we get to that, Lindsay, can you give us in your own words, your interpretation? What is Major League about?
Well, the struggling Cleveland Indians' ratio of wins to losses hasn't been the most inspiring. So when the new owner, Rachel Phelps, has the option to move the team to Miami, she hatches a devious plan to assemble a team of has-beens, never-weres, all headed by a former minor league manager turned car salesman, and the Indians are sure to finish dead last. If attendance is down, they become a financial drain on Cleveland, and Phelps can break the lease with the city. And as this motley crew also face personal and professional life obstacles, the one thing that they can come together on is working together as a team. And what the sabotaging new owner could have never figured was that this ragtag team could still be inspired and be infused with the spirit of baseball, especially after they find out Phelps's plan. Amping up their attitude, can-do energy despite injuries and being beaten down, the Indians are not going down without a fight. They might even bring the whole city of Cleveland together, and, to quote team leader Jake Taylor, they might just win the whole fucking thing.
Again, so many great quotes. Well, thanks for that. Let's get into our first clip, and we'll come back. We'll talk about Major League.
Here's a list of the players we'll be inviting to camp.
I never heard of half of these guys, and the ones I do know are way past their prime.
Most of these guys never had a prime.
The facts are we lost our 2 best players to free agency. We haven't won a pennant in over 35 years. We haven't placed higher than 4th in the last 15. Obviously, it's time for some changes.
This guy here is dead.
Cross him off, then.
This movie just seems endlessly quotable. I think one of the most quotable comedies of the 80s. And I think it's just really difficult to not only like mine comedy out of even little situations like this movie does, but at the heart of it to feel like a really thoughtful and genuinely warm-hearted sports movie. Usually I feel like they don't always go hand in hand. I mean, there's a few comedic sports movies, but I feel like this one really excels because it feels like the writer is a baseball fan. It's written for fans of baseball. It's written for fans of sports movies. I mean, clearly a lot of sports movies had came out before this one, and this definitely follows some of those tropes. I mean, a lot of what you see in this movie was taken from Slapshot. Add in the comedy and add in some of the friendship, working as a team themes, and you get something like this that I just feels like really difficult to pull off. And there's really, to me, not a false moment in Major League. Even though it gets silly sometimes, I feel like it feels very grounded.
Yeah, and the person grounding that was David S. Ward, who was the writer behind this as well as the director, and also a lifelong Cleveland Indians fan. And by age 29, he won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for The Sting. And that's a pretty well-acclaimed film, still, I think, beloved today. And he wrote on that for quite some time. In 1982, he would write and direct Cannery Row, and in 83, he wrote The Sting 2. Both of those films weren't necessarily like the biggest critical and commercial successes, but it was still keeping him in the Hollywood game. But something that never really left the back of his mind was, being this frustrated Cleveland Indians fan. And being a scriptwriter, thought, the only way that I'm ever going to see the Indians win any type of division or pennant or World Series, anything bigger than just the normal season that they play, the only way that I'm ever going to see that is if I write a movie about it. And I mean, he's not wrong. In 123 years of the club, it was like 11 division titles and only, I think, 6 league pennants, and they'd only been to the World Series twice, and the last time was in 1948. In fact, there's a joke in Major League where Bob Uecker says, free admission to anyone who was alive during the last time the Cleveland Indians were in the World Series. So this is where the idea of writing Major League began. Major League came out in 89, but he started writing the script in 1984. The general idea behind this was obviously an underdog story. It was well known that the Cleveland Indians were not the greatest team out there, but actually a teammate of mine, I play softball in the Dangerfields, that's what we're called. One of my teammates, who is also a Cleveland Indians fan and listener of the podcast, Ashley, said that even though Cleveland is not well regarded as one of the best teams out there, it doesn't mean that people that live in the city are not like diehard fans. And so the spirit that's in this film is totally true from what I understand from a Cleveland Indians fan.
And I totally agree. Like, I feel like he really captures that spirit. And even though I'm not like a lifelong Cardinals fan, when the Cardinals are doing good, there's something that brings the city together. And even when the Red Sox were in the series, or like the White Sox, like you start cheering for a team that hasn't won in a long time, because you see you just see the energy that it brings, and it brings the city alive, and everybody starts rooting. And they're like, hey, this can actually happen. Time and time again in this movie, even though I've seen it so many times, once they start winning, and you get that sense of realistic energy in the movie, and you start seeing the fans come together, you start seeing the city come together.
Something that's nice that David Ward did with the script too was that he grounded it in reality and knew that he had to make this film a comedy because they were known for not winning and not advancing that far. But what I like, though, is that when the Indians do win at the end of the film, we're not in a World Series game. We're in the division playoffs. And it's way more realistic. I think if this would have been a story of the Indians making it to the World Series, it would have felt unrealistic. So this idea of them, getting better and better, we believe them being able to win the division. And I don't want to know if they go on. This is good enough for me. And I think for a lot of people, it's good enough. You just want to see the Indians advance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think showing them go all the way from being the worst team in the league to winning the World Series is too much. And that's, again, it's keeping it based in this logic and not totally fantasy. And especially too, because they show how rough this team is in the beginning. It would be like a 4-hour movie if they showed the progression all the way to a World Series,
totally.
An entire season.
Totally. And by keeping this idea, this spirit of baseball, and this film coming from a legit lifelong fan, has this purity sense, and I think is the overall positivity behind this film. Even the jokes that are, a little more off color, like there's nothing really that negative throughout all of this. There's a lot of rallying around the community. And like you were just saying, you can not be a fan of a team, but you see them like winning, these people, these underdogs that haven't done well in a while. And you get behind them. And another thing to ground the script was to have your main characters. There's probably, I guess, 6 main ball players that we follow who all have some type of obstacle that they overcome. And this is the sub-story that Ward weaves through as we advance, as the Indians advance. Everybody has their little thing that they have to get over, or a challenge, struggle that they have to face.
They don't get deep into it in this movie, but I don't know if you ever watched the movie Moneyball, but this idea that, finding maybe not the best player in the league, but like each of these individual players has a specialty. Maybe they're not the best hitter, but they're really good at stealing bases or running, and then like selectively trying to find the individual talent in each player, and then as a combination, like doing a strategy of like massaging each of those, specialties into a team effort and to win, versus relying on 1 or 2 super talented players that have to carry a team. This being like truly a team effort for it to happen.
Overall, with everything that each one of these characters is going through personally and as a team, I texted you this really late at night, was that this movie to me is about redemption in so many ways. The team coming from behind, Jake Taylor becoming a better person and rekindling with his former flame. Even the older pitcher who in the beginning is really razzing Serrano and making fun of him, they come together at the end. Just everybody that has a problem with the other one. And like you said, it's not going very deep, but by the end of this, all of this camaraderie and team effort makes it to me just spill over into this like story of redemption as well as an underdog story.
I also like too that they set this movie up, not that every player, it's like their dream come true. No one really looks at this as like a top tier opportunity. Everybody, the players, the coach are like, okay, we're doing this, and it's not until like they're told like, we picked you because we wanted you to fail, that, and it's by that someone saying, we want you to fail, that kind of turns them around and using that negativity to create a positive and create a drive. And I think that's a great way to set up a story, because if everyone came in and they're like, yeah, man, we're ready, we're going to do this, right from the get-go, you don't have this first like 30 minutes where we're like, the players are kind of coming together and everybody's got different ideals about what they want to do and what they want to be. And then all of a sudden, by the time all the characters are set up and the story's set up, you feel like you've gotten to know these characters, and then you're with them, like they can all agree on one thing, like, oh, you're calling us pieces of crap, then we're going to win this whole thing. We're going for it.
Baseball to me is the one sport where you can get stuck in your head and feel beaten down, and like maybe you had a really bad game and the next game, you think, okay, I'm going to come back. This is what I was doing wrong the last game, and I'm not going to do it this time. And then the next game you suck too. It's really hard to get out of that mindset and that rut. And that's what we see in the beginning when this team gets together and, Roger Dorn's not wanting to get in front of the ball because it's going to, hit him in the face, and he doesn't want to, like, everybody's not giving it their all. And Charlie Sheen's Ricky Vaughn character doesn't realize that he can't see that well. Like, get some glasses, dude. And that's his struggle, and it's when these guys put in a little bit more effort when they start to get better and better. And then the team owner coming in and saying, I wanted you guys to suck, and the whole plan was to fire all of you and move the team. This is the final thing where they're like, well, you know what? We thought we were going to lose anyway. Let's just, just fuck it. We're going to do this.
And I like the approach of this team owner and her reasoning for, she doesn't want to be in Cleveland. She wants to go to Miami. The only stipulation is the team has to come in dead last for her to be able to get out of this contract they have with the city. To me, that seems very realistic. And I think it was based off of a true story.
Minnesota Twins, yeah.
And to me, it's just like it's a better setup than, and don't get me wrong here. I mean, we did a whole episode on Sandler, and I love Sandler sports comedies. But even though this is a comedy, they're using they're putting a little more effort into setting up the story of the whys versus his grandma needs money to do this. And so he's going to, there's a lot more at stake here. And so the stakes seem realistic, and the owner is not just like a caricature. She has some funny lines, and she makes for a really good villain, but it's not a throwaway character. And that's what I love. Everything is the humor is peppered throughout this movie, but there's some dignity and strength to all these characters. They're not just cartoons.
And for a movie that's predominantly a male cast, the two female characters that we do have in here, one being the villain and then the other being the love interest, it's nice that they're not really superficial. You get as deep with them as you do with anybody else. And like you said, Rachel Phelps, the villain, the owner, she has something behind her, and you want to hate her. And it's not just it's not a one note type of thing. And the same thing with Rene Russo's character. You completely understand why she doesn't want to be with Tom Berenger's Jake Taylor, but you also want them to be together. And she has substance behind her. For a male movie written by a man, I don't know how many times we've talked about that character is pretty underdeveloped. But it doesn't happen in Major League.
And if you're a fan of Ted Lasso, I'm certain you probably have seen Major League, and there's a lot of similarities between the team owner and Ted Lasso and the team owner in Major League, who owns this team but doesn't necessarily isn't coming from I love this sport and I love what this sport means to the city. They're just someone who is kind of stuck with this team and really wants not to have much to do with it, not want to have much responsibility, but then all of a sudden things start turning around, and we don't really get a sense of what's going to happen to the team. It's it becomes more about just them winning, and pretty soon the team owners takes a back seat to the story, but at the same time it's always there, it's always present, and when it is, I think that they use it for humor in the perfect way.
Yeah. So David Ward has a great idea behind him and a lot of heart, and knows a hell of a lot about baseball and this particular team. But it wouldn't be until a chance meeting with producer Chris Chesser, who was looking for a project, that Major League would start to get some traction. He was looking for something to do, and he wanted a solid writer, dependable, and someone that he liked. And that's not always going to be, it sounds like it would be an easy twofer, but you're not always going to find that. And he remembered a script he read before, Cannery Row, that was co-written by David S. Ward, and calls him up, asks him, what are you working on? And he brings up Major League. Chesser loved the idea. He's also a baseball guy, a Yankees fan, and he thought it was hilarious that the villain in this story was the Yankees. The Yankees have always been, they're the team. When you think of baseball, it's the Yankees. I'm a Yanks fan, So he loved the idea that they were the bad guys. So Chesser pitches the idea to a friend of his at Embassy Studios, and Embassy thinks, okay, let's throw some money at this project. And with that, Ward and Chesser began further developing the film. And it's my understanding that there wasn't a completed script at this point, just that David Ward had been working on it. And that's what he does. He starts banging out the rest of this, and over the next 6 months completes the script in 1984. So he and Chesser bring the finished script to Embassy Studios. They think it's funny, but a little bit too unreal, and they just don't think audiences are going to buy it. And despite David Ward using, like we mentioned before, this idea was kind of taken from something that, not exactly, but the Minnesota Twins, a former manager was also trying to move the team to another city. I don't think that owner was deliberately trying to tank them, but this was based in some type of reality before. And also, these characters are an amalgamation of real life baseball players. So Ward's okay, great. So no one's going to believe this, even though it's based on some truth. And here is where the story ends in that dreaded turnaround stage, which is when a studio says, okay, we've given you some money, but we just don't have any more interest. So in order for this project to move forward, another studio is going to have to come along, purchase the rights from Embassy, and probably at a higher price, reimburse them for the money that they've already put into the project and continue to develop it. And seems impossible, but there have been so many well-known movies. E.T. is the one that comes to mind, of movies that entered turnaround and then ended up being massive hits.
And at the time in the 80s, there really weren't too many successful baseball movies. I mean, we had The Natural with Robert Redford, and we had The Bad News Bears. But when they were approaching these studios, the studios were just saying, there's not a market for this. People just want to go to a baseball game. They don't want to watch a baseball game movie. Of course, these studios not knowing at the time that in just a few years, Bull Durham would come out and be a pretty big hit, and also had elements of comedy mixed with realistic portrayals of baseball players.
So over the next 3 years, this movie stays in turnaround, and both Chesser and Ward are working on other things, but this is always kind of like in the back of their minds. Enter, and this is not your Murray moment, but in 1987, Bill Murray goes to old friend and director of Tootsie, Sidney Pollack, with an idea for a comedy. Pollack sounds interested, and he starts thinking about potential writers. And David Ward comes to mind as a potential writer. He's a friend, he's won an Oscar, he's a dependable guy, well-liked. So Sidney Pollack goes to him and asks, what are you working on? And so they set up a meeting, and Ward, again, never letting the idea of Major League leave his brain, he decides to bring Chris Chesser with him to this meeting with Sidney Pollack. And they talk about the script that Bill Murray had brought to Sidney Pollack that would end up much later being King Ralph that David Ward did write. They started writing the outline at this time for the film and having a great meeting. At this point, David Ward brings up Major League, the story that's been in turnaround and his passion project that he wants to get made. Pollack sounds interested but is not a baseball fan, never even been to a game. But Ward gives him the script, and it turns out Sidney Pollack loves it and wants to produce it. So his company, Mirage, buys the rights from Embassy Pictures. Pollack will serve as executive producer on the film, but they still need some more funding. The script is getting shopped around still and makes its way to Morgan Creek, who at that time had only made Young Guns, but put a lot of effort into making that kind of a different type of movie to come out, especially for that time, and it was really successful. So they thought about taking a chance with Major League 2, read the script, loved it. And now Morgan Creek is on board to finance Major League. But just one more thing. They have to get permission from, Major League Baseball to be able to do this film, because it just wouldn't work if you're going to be not a real team and your league is called something else. It's just going to for a story that is an underdog story that is we have a community behind it. This is all about something that is true behind it. And David Ward is a fan. Would lose the entire point if it weren't the Cleveland Indians and weren't Major League Baseball. So they had to get permission. So Chesser and Ward were kind of worried about this. I mean, Major League Baseball is a huge thing, and they were just concerned, like, if they do, how much money is this going to be? So they approach, and, as Justin already said, at this point, there weren't that many successful baseball movies. And to Chesser and Ward's surprise, the MLB was on board and totally wanted to do this. And I think in 1987, 88, totally different time than now, there would be so many more hoops, so much red tape to jump through, so many more obstacles, but they read the script. They just had to make sure that it wasn't going to be terrible visibility for the league. And obviously the story is not, it's very positive, and they were excited about it. Morgan Creek just had to pay $100,000 for usage of team names and uniforms. Pretty simple deal. Like I said, I don't think that this would be that simple or that cheap nowadays.
Yeah, it's kind of astonishing to me that they got rights for $100,000 and kind of like you can do whatever you want, use the team's name, branding, just because, especially the 90s in baseball, like sports there was so much branding and selling baseball hats and players and jerseys. So it's just kind of wild to think of a time when they were just like, $100,000. Yeah, you can use whatever you want. And this movie, I think, would have been so much different without that. Like if it was like the Cleveland, some team that you never heard of and could only say professional baseball, but there was not these uniforms that had been around forever and like this, clear branding that everybody was familiar with that would keep the movie realistic. Because I feel like it would have felt like a movie like, oh, they couldn't get the rights. That's why everything is, has like an off-brand name.
And it's playing on the fact that the Indians have not been a good team historically. Yeah. You're just going to lose that real life element if it's not going to be the Cleveland Indians. And they did have to get permission from the Indians as well, from the team president and public relations manager, just like the MLB we have to make sure that this isn't going to reflect badly on the Indians. And in fact, they thought that it was awesome. I mean, it's no secret that their team has not been the greatest. And this is an inspirational story. The Yankees, they also had to get permission from the Yankees. And I guess Chesser was a little pissed off because no one was getting back to them about that. And, you know, that's his team and they're the villains. And he just was like, you know what, screw them. If we get permission, we get permission, but we're moving ahead with this. And we've already got permission from Major League Baseball. They can go to hell, whatever. And honestly, the Yankees probably love being the villains in this movie.
And I can't even imagine living in Cleveland when this movie came out and, you know, just getting first word, wait a minute, they're actually doing a movie on the Indians, but not like this historical type movie. It's like this fictionalized version that's a comedy.
Yeah. And Cleveland was not the only city that was super proud of this movie. Also Milwaukee, and that's because this movie shot in Milwaukee. Cleveland Municipal Stadium wasn't available at the time. The Browns were using it for preseason games. I think there was a dispute over like union, non-union work, but the biggest reason I found was that it was about $1 million cheaper to shoot in Milwaukee. And at the end of the day, you've got two big baseball towns that are proud of this movie. It's not that bad of a thing. So after 4 years of David Ward trying to get this passion project off the ground, Major League is going to happen.
And Morgan Creek's only big stipulation was they wanted to have two leads that were already well known, that were established. They had already had success with Charlie Sheen and Young Guns, who had already had earlier success with Oliver Stone's Platoon. He was the lead actor in that, and then Oliver Stone followed that up with another hit, Wall Street, which also had Sheen as the lead. So he was an up-and-coming rising star that, you know, was already having sort of like a marquee name status. They also looked to Platoon co-star Tom Berenger. Kind of funny that both of these, it's like every time I see Major League, I forget, oh yeah, Tom Berenger and Charlie Sheen were almost kind of like enemies in that movie, and then they're so friendly in this movie.
Yeah.
And Tom Berenger had been around since the 70s, had never really, you know, I wouldn't really consider him like in big flashy movies or like super well-known movies, but people knew his name and people knew his face. And Platoon, he got a lot of critical acclaim for his role in that. It was a very menacing character. And so
The Big Chill, that's always what I think of him, but that was like well before this.
So Charlie Sheen saw the script, was very excited about it. When he was aware that they were thinking of Tom Berenger, he called Tom Berenger because they were friendly, and both of them thought the script was fantastic. They were like, we should do this. For David S. Ward, you know, he wasn't established as a director, so obviously he's going to have to lean into whatever the studio wants and kind of go with what they want. And he really wanted actors that had athletic ability, that had played baseball. And this is one of those probably rare moments where a studio makes a suggestion of what they want, but then that happens to coincide with what the director wants out of an actor. And Charlie Sheen had played baseball in high school. Tom Berenger had some baseball experience. And so it was a perfect fit as far as David Ward was concerned. Perfect fit as far as the studio was concerned about having well-known actors. And so they just had to, hopefully, when these two merged together, that some magic would happen. So once everybody was happy with two of the leads, they had to round out the rest of the team. Also trying to keep in mind, like, number one, this was a comedy. Number two, we need people that can really play baseball. And so they get their other actors. They're like, we have to train. We need to go to like spring training, baseball camp style training to whip everybody into shape and get them looking like they are professional baseball players on film. And so we're going to talk about that. We'll go to a clip, but we'll come back. We'll talk about the rest of the casting process and them going into training and basically trying to look like a well-oiled team, but first look like a team that can play baseball and slowly make them look like they know what they're doing. We'll be right back.
Top of the sixth, and rookie sensation Ricky Vaughn on the pitch now. You can close the book on Kellner.
Thank God.
Relax, Ricky. We're only 4 runs down. We're still in this game.
You take it to him?
Oh, all right.
Look, man, guy gets a second, first sign indicator.
Vaughn, a juvenile delinquent in the offseason in his major league debut.
I'm gonna light your ass up, meat.
Vaughn into the windup in his first offering. Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed. Ball 4. Ball 8. Low, and Vaughn has walked the bases loaded on 12 straight pitches. Boy, how can these guys lay off pitches that close?
Wild thing! You make my heart sing. You walk everything.
Taylor, what you doing back up here?
Couldn't cut it the Mexican League.
That's your wife and my kids.
Vaughn in deep trouble here with Clu Haywood, last year's American League home run champ at the plate. Vaughn kicks, fires. Here is a swing and a drive toward left field and deep. Oh, boy.
No way, too high.
It is gone off the reservation. A grand slam home run for Haywood.
Looked like a strike anyway.
Where you go? Too high? What does that mean, too high? Too high.
So Vaughn is off to a rocky start as Haywood clears the bases with one swing.
Not too high, too hard, right?
First it was really high.
Who gives a shit? It's gone.
So like I was saying before, to keep with the authenticity of the movie, they wanted all these actors to look like they knew how to play baseball. Some did have experience, some, very little, but they decided to do this baseball boot camp, which was like 2 to 6 weeks to get everybody not only looking like that they can play baseball, but also like warming them up so that nobody injured themselves during the shooting, because going from doing nothing to like throwing a baseball like every day, you're gonna end up with your arm in a sling. So they wanted everybody to be conditioned enough so that way shooting wouldn't be so rigorous for everybody to do these scenes over and over again. Of course, these guys aren't professional baseball players, so David Ward took it a step further and looked for outside consultation by professional baseball players to either A, stand in, or B, coach some of these guys to get them to sort of act and have movements that were closer to what a professional baseball player would do.
The production hired Los Angeles Dodgers Steve Yeager. He was with the Dodgers from 72 to 85, and he was not only the consultant, but he also stood in for Tom Berenger a couple times. The boot camp was anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how many scenes you had, what you had to do, physicality-wise. Obviously, the main stars are going to have more time during this baseball boot camp. And like Justin said, we want to look authentic. You want to look like everybody is an actual baseball player. And this is going to be hard on your body when everybody's training and going through it and feeling really rough when you're just coming from not playing baseball, no matter what your experience is, to being thrown into this for multiple hours a day. Kind of like the breaking down, it breaks you down, it humbles you. And so all of these guys going through the same process, these guys being broken down only to rebuild themselves with looking like a skilled baseball player. I don't know if David Ward knew that this was going to happen, but it really created this sense of camaraderie and a real team between these guys. So, we see it on screen. Of course, they're actors. Of course, they're being a team. But there really was this sense of like your buddies all throughout this movie. And I think that adds to the overall feel of the Indians that we see in the movie.
Now, to delve a little further into the cast and casting here, we said that Tom Berenger and Charlie Sheen were first chosen by the studio. Though I think this movie is essentially built around the Jake Taylor, Tom Berenger character, I feel like Charlie Sheen's Ricky Vaughn Wild Thing runs away with the movie. He's not in every scene, but I feel like he's the character that is sort of the MVP of this cast, and I think the most enjoyable to watch. He gets a good mix of roughneck humor and then also has this like endearing coming to terms with his talent, coming to terms with himself and his past, and pushing forward to be one of the best players on the team.
And Charlie Sheen was, I think, hands down the one with the most experience in baseball. He played in high school, but got kicked off for having bad grades. And I didn't know that he got sent to a baseball camp in Missouri. The Mickey Owen Baseball School, didn't know that existed. But he went there for more training when he was younger and really wanted to pursue baseball. That, definitely played into his passion for wanting to do this movie. He knew how to pitch a little already. His fastball started out around 79, and with some, encouragement called steroids, he was able to get that pitch up to 88, 89. Charlie Sheen totally admits that he took steroids. He didn't start that like right into it, but a couple weeks in, he said he was pretty roided out.
And say what you will about Charlie Sheen. I mean, he's had a pretty eccentric and wild life. You know, I was like digging into some old interviews with Charlie Sheen, and one's right around the time or a little bit after Major League came out. And man, when you see these interviews with him, it just seems like acting is like the least of what's on his mind. But somehow he always delivers these like fairly genuine characters. I don't think Charlie Sheen's like the greatest living actor alive, but I think that, you know, he never really tries to go like outside of his range. And I certainly think that he's believable in this movie. And I love this idea that he can throw the ball really fast. That's his superpower. But it's like this wild ball that like it's hard for him to throw a strike. And it turns out, like you said at the top of the episode, that he just needed glasses. He didn't realize that he couldn't see real well. And so once they give him these glasses, which are supposed to make him look like a big dork, like I think that there's this funny line where the coach, Lou Brown's like, well, seeing is the most important thing. And Wesley Snipes is like, it's not that important. You know, they look totally fine. It's like some like Buddy Holly type glasses.
And that was based on a Yankee player who was a pitcher known to have a like really wicked throw. He had glasses, not like that, but were kind of Coke bottle style.
I also think David Ward did a really good job of writing his character, because in the beginning, you know, he could have been kind of a one note. This guy went to jail. He's got a goofy haircut. He's got a bad attitude. But you start seeing his character merge with Harris, who's like the old pitcher. And even there could have been the old trope of like the new guy coming in and the old pitcher is about to go out to pasture. There's a tiny bit of that, but it feels like they went a little bit deeper into their relationship, and but still keeping it funny, you know, with like you put snot on the ball, you know, and this idea of like, oh, eventually I'm not going to, you know, you're not going to have your arm, you know, your young arm. And without really like, I think like coddling the audience, like giving us an idea of like the new guys coming in, the old guys coming out. But it, again, feels very genuine. It always feels like the advice from older players or the coach in this movie seem kind of spot on. It doesn't feel phony, and it doesn't feel like the movie's stopping for someone to give some sort of speech while the music starts to swell. The movie always stays in this sort of like comedic tone. We still have these scenes that seem, you know, like a real movie, like not like a comedy where like when the jokes end, the rest of the story is like kind of off tilt and it's not working. This one seems to have that balance going like from start to finish.
It's totally fluid. Yeah, when we have those moments. And I would never say that this movie is sentimental really, but it has little twinges of it everywhere. And if you were to, you know, go into that like wisdom from the elder moment, it would feel completely wrong for this film.
In the whole like Wild Thing phenomenon that happens with Charlie Sheen's character, you see this time and time again with baseball players. Like somebody does something and then, you know, a city or like everybody like jumps on, and then the media gets attention and they run with, you know, a nickname or whatever. And, you know, that becomes their signature thing. And I thought they handled that really well in this movie, where he at first is, you know, kind of like, what's going on? And then by the end of the movie, we're all excited when the Wild Thing song starts up.
Totally.
And side note that I found out that the song Wild Thing was written by Chip Taylor, Jon Voight's brother, Angelina Jolie's uncle.
I had no idea. Wow.
It's kind of wild.
Yeah, it is very wild. Wild Thing. I also got to say, on behalf of Charlie Sheen, he was throwing upwards of 150 pitches like a day, especially in the beginning. And then when you're shooting, 150 pitches is like a game. That's like 9 innings for a regular baseball player. That poor guy's arm must have been, I mean, he must have been like in great shape afterwards, but it was really rough.
And though I think Rick Vaughn is the most memorable character from this movie, Tom Berenger's Jake Taylor is at the center of the movie. I think he's the heart of the film. Like he's the one that everybody looks to as sort of like the leader. He's the one that is leading the charge to win the whole fucking thing. And Tom Berenger, I don't know that I've ever seen an actor perform someone that has like this like sort of chronic pain, but they're trying to fight through that. If you're someone who has like a bad back or bad knees, like I have.
Justin's not speaking from experience.
Yeah, you know, it's like, I know that gritting your teeth feel where you're like, I got to get through my shift, or I got to do this. And you have that sort of, you can see the pain in your eyes, but you're still trying to like, someone's like, oh, are you okay? And you're like, oh yeah. It's just like, my knees are bad, but they're like, cause you look like you're in a lot of pain, like you're getting kind of flush. Tom Berenger's like never loses that throughout the whole movie. He carries that pain with him, like that physical pain where he's like fighting through it. It's just like every scene that Jake Taylor's in, he looks like he's trying not to move a certain way or like bend a certain way. And especially once they get into the games, it's very believable. It's like this guy is in immense pain, and Tom Berenger really, really displays that in a very realistic way that makes you feel for him through the whole movie.
I noticed when there are some montages of the Indians doing really poorly and then when they're doing really well, that when they're doing really poorly, Jake Taylor's getting just like trampled at the plate, and you feel like when he falls on his knees, it's not like a close-up or something, but you're so invested in that's his like pain that when he hits his knees, you feel it. But then when the montages come up where the Indians are doing well and he gets knocked, he like doesn't fall on his knees. You're like, all right, he's coming back. He knows how to position himself behind the plate. And the final scene where his, hit wins the game, when he goes down and hits his knee, you're like, oh man. It harkens back to this idea behind this character that he's this baseball lifer that is just looking for one more day in the sun. He's got like just a little bit of time, like he's got one more good year left in him, and he can do this. But you see that pain. But baseball is his life.
And Tom Berenger has a look to him that's very much like those old 60s and 70s actors that they were leading men type actors, but they look like they lived a hard life off screen. Tom Berenger's character is supposed to have lived like Jake Taylor is like, was a party animal and like a womanizer and like didn't take care of his body, even though he's a baseball player. And Tom Berenger really embodies that. And I think it's because he does have that. And, and that worked for him in Platoon. He was supposed to be this hardened, scary platoon leader who like would kill somebody and like was very messed up in the head. And
his
just
facial scars help too.
Yeah, but he just has that, he has that ability, is that particular look and physique that like really fits these type of characters, but then also has like a gentle side to him that I think he displays in this movie, especially when he's trying to slowly win back the Rene Russo character and sort of rebuild his life back in Cleveland.
Justin, I like that you focus in on Charlie Sheen, like he's your lead for this film. And for me, it's Tom Berenger. He's like, even though he is that guy, the former womanizer and probably a hard drinker partying, like when the movie opens, he's passed out, hungover, and with some lady in bed, like he's lived a hard life. But I also see him as kind of a little bit of a softie who's realizing, shit, man, I'm like at the end of my career and I need to right some wrongs, and I need to start taking better care of myself and doing better. I don't know. I like him being the heart of the movie, and he's probably my lead for this film too. And also Tom Berenger, as far as experience, he was not as experienced as Charlie Sheen, but did do some Little League. He was more of like a football player from what I understand. Some fun facts though about him as far as the spring training, the baseball training. He could hit, he could catch, but he couldn't throw. And there are many times when a catcher's got to spring up from their knees and throw to second. And there is a shot during the spring training where he does throw, and it's crappy. It's terrible. And the fact that he couldn't nail throws did worry David Ward. But the fortunate thing is when you're throwing to second, or when a catcher has to make a throw, they're wearing the catcher's mask. So they had their baseball consultant, Steve Yeager, stand in for him during those scenes. But pretty much all of the other stunts, I think, were Tom Berenger. And he gets nailed a fair amount of times at the plate.
Yeah, they did a really good job with the body doubling of this movie, because it looks pretty seamless when you see the game play. And there's just quite a few scenes where you're watching a pretty decent portion of the actors like play these games.
Yeah. I like that too, that you feel as if you are really watching a game.
Now, probably at the time that Major League came out, Corbin Burnson was probably the next well-known name. He had established himself as a breakout character on the hit TV show LA Law in 1986, and that show ran from 86 to 94. And the character he played on that show is very similar to this character that he plays in Major League, this sort of
douchebag.
Yeah, very, slimy and like only cares about how, he appears to people and branding. His character, at first when you watch it, you're like, God, man, what, he just seems like your typical asshole type character. But I think that it was very representative of, there were baseball players like this. And I distinctively remember being a kid and Jose Canseco being my favorite player. And then you find out like, oh yeah, someone tried to get his autograph and he just like didn't care about the fans, only cared about his image and women and money. And that's essentially, and like you said before, like this idea of redemption, this theme of redemption, this movie, even the worst character finds a way to go with the team and work with everybody and let down his guard and, actually play hard because, it's time and time again, this movie, the joke is that I'd rather let the ball roll past me than accidentally the ball hit my face or like me to get injured because, I want to use his face to sell commercials and stuff like that instead of actually like, I don't care about us winning or I don't care about anybody here. It's all about me.
And he does sell that really well. This self-centered, superficial, just obsessed with his own image type of guy. And his character kind of moves away from what like older league baseball used to be, where it was about the game, where it was about your camaraderie and being on a team. He represented that, like the guys that were just in it for the money. And I think that now that definitely still exists, but there are also those guys too that believe in the team as a whole. And I like his character arc of, he does come around and realizes it's not just about him or his image and starts to play together as a team.
And one very subtle joke that I never got when I was younger, that watching it as an adult was that I thought was like really clever of his character, is that when the team has to do the American Express commercial, everybody's kind of delivering lines a little wooden, but like doing it. But he's the one who's like super suave and is like, this is supposed to be his thing. He's like the worst at it. He's like, just seems so like terrible at like delivering a line and like looking real. And I thought that was just like a nice little touch of like, not only is this guy arrogant, but he's like actually not even good at what he's like wants to be.
That's how you know that David Ward writing the script, he had planned that one and he couldn't wait for that joke to come up. That's when you know that there are more layers to just supporting characters too.
And I think that whole American Express joke hit harder then, because now it's just like, it's a given. I mean, there's before like when someone's like a first draft pick for anything, they're already signing to Nike or like Wheaties or whatever. I mean, and the insurance commercials, like, that's like that's what's on the table. Like if you're in the top 10, wanted players going pro. But here is just, I think the dawn of this sort of, let's use our celebrity to sell, whatever.
And also showing that the Indians are becoming a team that's dependable and that people like now.
It's also just such a great little cut right when because you see them all standing there and you're like, what's going on? And then they start saying the lines.
Hello, you know us? We're a Major League Baseball team.
But since we haven't won a pennant in over 30 years, nobody recognizes us, not even in our own hometown.
That's why we carry the American Express card.
No matter how far out of first we are, it's cool. It keeps us from getting shut out at our favorite hotels and restaurant-type places.
So you're looking for some big league clout. Apply for that little green home run heater.
Look what it's done for us. People still don't recognize us, but
we're contenders now.
The American Express card. Don't steal home without it.
Well, now we did an entire episode on Wesley Snipes when we covered New Jack City, and that was only 2 years after this movie, and Wesley Snipes became a household name. But when Major League came out, he was still starting out. He had only done a few things, and I really feel like, I said this before, we see this side of Wesley Snipes in this movie, portraying a character in such a funny way that he really didn't do very often. I mean, we saw a little glimpse of it in White Man Can't Jump, but it was a different kind of humor in that, like not letting himself look like a goofball. In this one, I feel like he really is allowing himself to come off a little corny, but at the same, but arrogant. But then there's this like charm there that is underneath everything that just like draws you in. And really is Willie Mays Hayes is like one of my favorite characters in this movie. I wish there were more scenes, small example of like him opening up his locker, not seeing the tag that he got let go, and he's about to freak out and he looks around. He doesn't want anyone to know that he's so excited because other guys are getting cut. And so he closes his locker, but then runs outside and like does a little happy dance. And just those little moments really embody this character of like someone that you're rooting for, who's like, he's actually brings the enthusiasm. Like he's the player that like, he wants to be a big famous baseball player, but also isn't afraid to let people know that, and just his introduction to throughout the entire movie, all the way down to his like Willie Mays Hayes,
I like that he's the self-made guy, the guy that didn't that isn't supposed to be there, that wasn't scouted, drafted, anything like that, but he knows that he has a talent, and his one thing, he can run real fast, which is ironic because Wesley Snipes wasn't really a fast runner, and that's why you see Willie Mays Hayes running in slow motion a lot. It was so he could look like he's running much faster than he actually is. But he's a great character. He's actually the only one, as soon as I heard David Ward talking about who these characters are based on, he was the only one that I knew, because Ricky Henderson was like my era of when I was like really into baseball, and I like called it out. I'm like, it's Ricky Henderson, and it totally was. Of course, Willie Mays too, but yeah. That spunkiness, that scrappiness of Ricky Henderson.
And again, David S. Ward putting in these tiny little bits of humor of, like early on in the movie, like Wesley Snipes, slides hands first to the base, but doesn't quite get there. And then you just see the baseman like move his hand, like come toward me a little bit more. You didn't quite make it. And Wesley Snipes gives him the finger. It's just those little moments of like, even though that we're having these like essentially like montage sequences, never letting the jokes like slip by. As much as David Ward had an issue with Wesley Snipes not being able to run faster than anybody, even though that's his character's thing, he did have an ability to hit pop-ups very easily, because his character's situation is he can run really fast, but every time he hits the ball, he hits pop-ups. And so in the movie, his character during training has to repeatedly be hitting these pop-ups. And I only played baseball for a little bit in Little League, but like David S. Ward said, hitting pop-ups one after another is like incredibly hard to do, even if they're like throwing a pitch to you for that purpose. And Wesley Snipes had the ability to like hit after hit, do these pop-ups so that way they could, show that weakness in his character in the movie.
And he also did a lot of sliding too. So every time he's sliding, that's Wesley Snipes. And it got to the point that he was over it too, because his legs were just like bruised up and scratched up, and he was still a champ about it, but I think he was pretty over it by the end of the production.
And later we'll get into those sequels, but just to say right here that probably the biggest thing that was sorely missed in Major League 2 was the omission of Wesley Snipes playing Willie Mays Hayes and having another actor sub in to play his character.
Omar Epps was fine, he's just he got a paycheck,
And it's worth noting that Wesley Snipes, who would go on to work with Spike Lee just a few years later as a star of Jungle Fever, did turn down a part in Do the Right Thing to take on this role in Major League, which he said he did not regret, because Major League really sort of put his name out there and really catapulted his career to move on to pretty much like after this movie. I mean, he was the top billed star of like for years, so didn't regret that one moment. And the last thing I'll say about Wesley Snipes is he did skirt the lines of comedy here and there in a few movies, Tu Wong Fu, Demolition Man, but he did kind of make a return to comedy in the movie Dolomite Is My Name. It was like a Netflix movie that came out in 2019 with Eddie Murphy, and he kind of steals the movie as this sort of like eccentric diva actor who takes this movie because his career's going downhill. And again, watching that, you're just like, Wesley Snipes, please stop doing action movies and do more comedies, because I think he's really, really talented at being like the funny man. So as with every 80s movie that we've covered on this podcast, there's always these moments where you're like, oh, has that aged that well, when you watch it. And this movie, for the most part, I think does all right. I think the only part of the movie that kind of skirts the stereotypical line is the Pedro Serrano character. Though when I watch it, the character is like so committed that it doesn't feel like the joke is on him. Like he's not just a flash in the pan character where they give him like 3 lines. He's a essential part of the team and the other players actually care about him. So again, like when I was watching it a few times, like with that in mind, and again, there's with the voodoo stuff that is played for jokes. But again, I think that his character is memorable and it's a good performance.
And to be fair, David S. Ward took that from a rumor about a trio of brothers that were actual baseball players. So it's based in something, and it's really well known that baseball players are really superstitious, whether it's you deal with it with voodoo or whatever it is. But yes, I totally get what you're saying.
And Dennis Haysbert, who plays Pedro Serrano, like you see him in interviews, when he first starts talking, you wouldn't even realize that he was Serrano because and that was one of his first roles, I believe.
I think it was his first movie.
Yeah, and he just immediately comes on screen and like embodies this character with a shaved head and like, he looks like he's like 3 times bigger than any player. And just comes in with such like a authoritative presence that even Corbin Burnson's Roger Dorn giving all the other rookies shit. But like when Pedro comes up to him, he's just kind of like, okay, don't want to mess with this guy.
And it's little moments like that David Ward said that Dennis Haysbert brought a lot more to the Serrano character than what was written in the script. And I think that's why he's one of the more larger than life characters in all of this. And you're rooting for him the whole time. His arc is that he's putting all of his trust into this like voodoo deity, Jobu, and is, in essence, Jobu is supposed to give him the ability to be a better baseball player. But what we see at the end of the film when he does this great line where he's like, fuck you, Jobu. I'm going to do this myself. And then what does he do? He knocks it out of the park. So the character arc of being, you're trying to, you're not believing in yourself. And then when you finally do, you're a much better player. P.S. When Dennis Haysbert hits that home run, he actually did hit that home run out of the park. And whether it doesn't work well in 2024 or not, the little character of Jobu is still brought up a fair amount in baseball. In fact, Justin, you sent me a photo from a Cardinals game, I think recently, where a Cardinals player had Jobu.
Yeah, you see them in a dugout, and they've got the little Jobu figure like sitting on one of the benches. Where every baseball team needs a manager, someone that's seen everything, done everything, needs to whip these guys into shape. As much as I love Tom Hanks as the baseball manager in League of Their Own, he's in my top 3 like favorite roles of like this type of character. I just don't think anyone comes as close as James Gammon as Lou Brown in this movie. His look, the mustache, the gravelly voice, you would just think that they went and actually hired him from like a tire store and he left managing that tire store to come be in this movie. And, he was a trained, and he's, been in a ton of movies, but this one is just distinctive. He'll always be Lou Brown in my mind, not just for his humor and not just for his look, but his convincing, genuine care for these players and like giving them wisdom, giving them advice. And then also, again, delivering this sort of like rallying speech that doesn't feel sappy and too sentimental and saccharine for, feel-good movie.
He's such the manager that has the backs of all of his players. I guess he was kind of like that on set too. People looked to him as an actor, as a leader of the group, just as he was a manager and for this team. When I was growing up, you don't have a concept of age really, but movies that you've seen. I grew up thinking that he was the Cowardly Lion in Wizard of Oz. He kind of looks like it, that he's got a little bit of a lion face and the voice, obviously not the same, but I agree with you with that voice. It's like a perfect just like what you think of a baseball coach.
Like this movie came out when I was like 11, 12, and what was always burned into my mind, what I always thought was the funniest part in this entire film when I was a kid was Roger Dorn walking up to him and be like, I've got this contract right here and it says that I don't need to do any calisthenics that I feel unnecessary. And like Lou Brown like takes it like he's going to read it and then like puts it on the ground and then like you just hear him like urinating on it. And it was just, to me, like, I was like, whoa, this is how like you can handle a situation, but it's in line with his character. And, he's not going to take any shit off these players, not going to like baby anybody. It's just like, we're here to play baseball. We're going to train and you're going to do it right. If you follow me, maybe you'll get to play next season.
That's a great example of the overall humor in this movie. Like there are, the one-liners, the quotes that you remember, but there's no dialogue that happens that makes that scene funny. It's all reaction. And Lou Brown's face like doesn't change the entire time. They
always give him these lines that like really drive like every character, like, hey, he may run like Hayes, but he hits like shit. Well, another player that has that voice and mannerism that just feels so real is Chelsea Ross' portrayal of Eddie Harris, the seasoned older pitcher who is he's a God-fearing, doesn't probably a little racist, yes. Pretty straight-laced, just like thinks that a lot of these guys are like totally screwy, but somehow manages to like you're laughing at him at the same time, but he doesn't like, I know I've said this before, but could easily have been just like this throwaway cartoony version of this stock character, this type of trope. David S. Ward giving these guys some funny lines that are showing their character, but at the same time keeping the humor in the movie, and just the whole like, are you trying to tell me Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball? It just time and time again, his character's like a character you love to hate, but you also grow to like have a fondness for him toward the end of the movie, especially passing on the torch to Ricky Vaughn is like the new, lead pitcher.
And I love with his character arc of, he's rude and terrible to Serrano and makes fun of Serrano for his religion. And then, drinks Jobu's rum. And then what happens? He gets hit in the head with a bat. And then we see towards the end of the movie that he's warming up in the bullpen and he's got Jobu like down by his feet, like he's realized, okay, maybe I'm a little too set in my ways and I got to think outside the box a little bit.
When you see the little exchange with him and Serrano when they're in the plane and it's like shaking and he's like, oh, now you believe in him. Yeah. Like Serrano's kind of like doing the Catholic cross. I don't know. It's nice. And again, it's like trying to do a movie where because, a lot of these, different people come together and they're in a room and like, of course they're going to have different ideals about politics and religion and race. And this movie handles all of that a way that feels light, but doesn't feel like totally like removed and erased from the film, which I think a lot of times now in movies you see that where they're just like, let's just not bring any of it up, and they did it in the 80s too. They're just like, we're all going to come together, all these different races and religions, and we're going to put in a room, but we're not going to bring any of it up. Yeah. And everyone's just going to get along automatically and no one's going to have a problem with each other. And we know that that's not reality. And I think this movie does a good job of handling that, but not making that like a boilerplate issue, like message in the movie.
And Chelsea Ross said he thinks what got him the role was that he was a pitcher. Like 20 years prior, he played with Southwest Texas State, but he thought what got him cast was the fact that he could actually pitch curveballs. He looked like a pitcher, he was a pitcher, and he could still do it and had that kind of like easy in with David Ward.
When round out the cast here, we've got Rene Russo, who we talked about a great deal when we did our Lethal Weapon series discussion. And this is like the start of Rene Russo's career as an actor. Then though her character is not giving like a ton to work with here, she really, I think, comes off the screen as like a genuine person who like cares about Jake Taylor, but also like realizes how wrong he was and like she's still hurt from it. And this movie, as much as it is about sports and redemption and jokes, it does, there's like 20 minutes of this movie it's peppered throughout where there's a romance going on, and that's really hard to do. And when I was little, I won't lie, like that was probably where I would like fast forward through the third Rene Russo, like Jake Taylor scene. Watching it now, it's like, aside from Jake Taylor being a little stalkerish, Rene Russo does a good job of like, pushing him away. Eventually he wears her down and, we see that great shot of her like showing up at the game at the end when he's won, and he doesn't have anybody to celebrate with other than his team, and he sees her, and you get that emotional punch in the movie.
And though she only has a few scenes in this film, we have to also remember that even though there is this connection between her character Lynn and Jake Taylor, another thing is that her character used to be an athlete. She was, what did Jake say? She was a second round alternate or something for the Olympic team. So in that sense, Lynn like gave up what Jake is still doing, and that was one thing that brought them together, was their kind of like love of sports. And after the first time that Jake kind of, when he successfully stalks her back to her own apartment, and he says, well, how did I do? And she gives him like pointers, like, because that's still how they relate to each other. And it's, even though she doesn't have that much, like you said, that much to work with, there is still that depth to her that we see. Okay, it wasn't just sex. It wasn't just she's easily manipulated by him. And I don't know if it's like that he wore her down. I just think that their love never died, and she thought he's never going to change. And we do see that he's changed a little bit, and that she's never let him go, and they still have this kind of connection. And I like that they made it about sports, and, she's still there to support him. She's not going to let Jake know that she's in the audience, but she wants to be there. And the exact opposite of Rene Russo's character is Margaret Whitten, who plays Rachel Phelps, the new team owner. She's inherited the team because her husband died, and she could care less about it and wants to deconstruct it, sell off the parts, and move to Miami. Margaret Whitten is one of my favorites that pops up in a lot of 80s movies that were with me throughout growing up. I've already talked about how much I love her in The Secret of My Success. I did that as a pick of the week. I loved her as the mom in Little Monsters. And in this one, playing Rachel Phelps, she's up there for villains that I want to keep watching. She is cunning, sassy, smart. She's like attractive in all of the greatest ways. Like when you're attracted to someone because they're just such a bitch, that's kind of what she is for me personally. I can't wait till she's on screen, but I also can't wait for them to prove her wrong.
I also really love the good way to break up the movie as far as like time frames go, because anytime they have a game and they start doing better, they always cut to Rachel Phelps with her lackeys up in the stands, and she gets more and more annoyed, but her lackeys get more and more excited because they're like, oh, we didn't actually think they were going to win. They're not necessarily agreeing with the fact that they want to tank the team. And I just love when they finally get to the championship game, and they're Rick Vaughn comes out and they're playing the Wild Thing song. She's like, I hate that fucking song.
That's what I mean. She has great lines that it's, even though you hate her, you want to see more of her. And though she is extremely hateable, the original ending to this film was that this was Rachel Phelps' plan of motivation the whole time, that she was terrible to the players so they would hate her and play better as a team. The way that the scene plays out, and she is in her office and she's explaining this to Lou Brown, like, this was all part of my master plan. The way she explains it, it does kind of work. That she's like, the team, like, we were out of money. There was nothing I could do other than to push you guys to do something. And I couldn't afford to get anybody that was better. This is who I chose. But each one of these people I picked because they had a ability that was within them. And she's like, Lou, I picked you because I knew that you were the guy that could bring out these qualities in them. It's actually like David Ward did a good job of writing this scene that you kind of start to go, whoa, my brain can't wrap around this. I've spent an hour and a half hating this woman, and now I'm supposed to like her. I get why audiences did not like this original ending, but it's out there on YouTube. It's out on, DVD and Blu-ray. You should check it out just to see how you feel about it.
Yeah. I love the ending that they went with, but it's always interesting to me to see this like alternate ending of any movie. And you kind of really like watch something to see, oh, obviously this is why this worked or this didn't work.
And what's wild is it wasn't that they shot two different endings at the time. They were committed to this ending, and it wasn't until, like I said, test audiences hated it. And by this point, Margaret Whitten was like in London doing some other production, and David Ward had to fly over there, recreate all of the scenes where she's pissed off about the Indians doing better, like rebuild the sets and shoot it himself, just to be like, well, we have to completely like change all of this. And I mean, it's kind of nuts, but at least he was committed to doing it and not going with an ending that he knew wasn't going to work.
Now, of all the roles in this movie that I think have aged the best, Bob Uecker is the radio announcer. Uecker was a professional baseball player in the 60s and then went on to become a professional broadcaster, radio announcer for sports games since the 70s in Milwaukee. And when I watched this movie as a kid, I didn't realize who Bob Uecker was. I mean, a lot of people knew like, oh yeah, it's Bob Uecker. This is what he does for a living. That's why he's so natural in this. But his character's like inflections, like the way he describes things culturally, radio announcers like all took from Bob Uecker. Like it seems like everybody wants to be like, you know, we're going to add a little flavor to the descriptions, like add a little humor there. Just about everything he says in this movie is hilarious, all the way down to when he starts and he's like, no one's listening to this. It doesn't matter what I say if I'm like breaking like, you know, radio violations or, you know, and all the way down to freaking out that they're actually winning, to like drinking on the job. I think his role in this is like so important as far as like continually showing there be movement in the team, but also in the same way that they, like I was saying, they cut to Rachel Phelps in the stands, like watching the game, getting more annoyed. They break up a lot of the scenes, being able to cut to Bob Uecker, like talking about the game, and then also to like as a side joke, the younger announcer who's like not really getting to say much, he's just sort of like watching Bob Uecker and like astonishment, like I can't believe you're saying this, or at the same time. Again, we're going to talk about sequels here in a minute, and Bob Uecker goes on to be in the sequels, but I think here's like when he's the most on fire, just like one riff after another, kind of taking shots at the ball players. And I think that's something too that nowadays, you know, like there's announcers that like are villains almost, like people are like, oh, I hate that guy, you know, he always bashes our team or whatever, like but it also makes it more fun. It gets people more into the action and makes them feel like they're a part of the game.
His sarcasm is so flawless. I love it so much in this movie. And Ward was really excited to get him for this. I mean, why wouldn't you be? That's exactly who you want for this role. And Ward also told him, you don't have to follow the script. So, like, do what's in your heart. And Bob Uecker's like, he should be really proud of himself. And I think he is really proud of himself for his work in this.
And I feel like every sports movie or any movie that had a commentator from here on out always looked, I feel like Major League was like a benchmark. Like they looked at Major League for like, here's how you do it really well. Let's like try to do our variation of that and, you know, use it wisely for a couple of quips and moments of humor.
Personally, I think we got hosed on that call. And just a quick shout out, round out this cast here. Pete Vukovich, who is the Yankee slugger that is always hitting every single pitch that's hit to him. Ricky Vaughn doesn't want to go up to him, and he's the one that, you know, that Ricky strikes out finally at the end of the game. He was actually a major league pitcher, played with a lot of teams, including the Cardinals and the Brewers. And he originally auditioned to be, or he came in to audition to be the pitcher. And as soon as he came up, they were like, dude, this guy, you kidding? This guy is like our slugger. This is our villain. I think having a baseball player for this was kind of perfect. Another shout out, she has 2 scenes, but Mrs. Roger Dorn, played by Stacey Carroll, a bit part, but her 2 scenes that she has are completely contrasting. Like one, she's like Susie Homemaker, the like doting wife of Roger Dorn, who's this self-absorbed jerk that we've already talked about. And then she's at home, happy for her husband on the road, you know, on this traveling game, and sees him cheating on her in the background on national television. And then what does she do to get revenge? She goes out and sleeps with Ricky Vaughn. It helps like fuel a little bit of Roger's growth because he's humbled. He's totally humbled by this. Who knows what happened in their marriage? But she was like, if you're going to like treat me like trash, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to tell you straight to your face and rub it in your face. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah, and as much as it's not really needed, because it's like there was already quite a few subplots happening in the movie, but it does allow there to be more tension. Like the stakes are higher at the game because they're like
the final game.
Yeah, we don't need Dorn and Vaughn like getting into a fight right before they have to play this like very important game. And the way that that's handled is like the tension's there, and it's like let's keep these guys away from each other. But then they end it with humor with like them hugging, and then Dorn punches him in the face and hugs him again. It's just a very good way to like put a cap on that, but also like, again, keeping it in the realm of like reality, but like we're going to go a little outside and make it funny.
He also has a quote that I quote the most at Dangerfield's softball games, which is when I'm running by the pitcher. I don't know how many times I said, "Strike this motherfucker out." It's so good.
Now, once the movie was completed, David Ward has said in interviews that people always ask him why the Randy Newman song in the opening. I think that song fits incredibly well. It's like a really catchy song. I mean, Randy Newman's got a great voice. This is prior to him being super well known for doing the You Got a Friend in Me for Toy Story. David S. Ward just was like, there's no songs about Cleveland. It was a song about Cleveland. So it was like, let's use this for the opening, because the opening of the movie's got shots of Cleveland. There's the newspaper clippings of the Indians. It makes the movie feel more homegrown in the opening, even though most of the movie was shot outside of Cleveland. After they filmed everything, they went to Cleveland and did these pickup shots of the city and people around the city, a couple of like landmark pieces, and works really well. It feels like kind of like seamlessly moves into the movie and you feel like you're in Cleveland. At least for me, someone who's like never been to Cleveland. I don't know, maybe the people of Cleveland were like, none of this looks like Cleveland, but I think it works for a general audience.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect opener. It's like a slow burn introduction into the movie. The sappiest song of the movie, Bill Medley, Most of All You. It's the love theme, whether it's actual lyrics or the instrumental that ends the movie, and also is the music behind the Jake and Lynn love story. I think there's always a moment in almost every episode where I say, this is my cry moment. Well, this is my cry moment. Whenever this song happens, I like it used in spurts. I did listen to the whole thing the other day on Spotify, and I'm like, I like it in the spurts that it's used in Major League. But if you're feeling the emotions of this movie, I think this song really works.
And the song, of course, that we hear throughout the movie, especially once Ricky Vaughn starts making waves, is Wild Thing, performed in the movie by the band X. Like I said earlier, originally written by Chip Taylor. That came out in the 60s, but it was performed by the band The Trogs. There's been other variations of the songs that have been recorded throughout the years, but after the success of this movie, that song got a second life, and like 1 year later, comedian Sam Kinison did his version of Wild Thing, which was him like screaming, and there was a whole music video to it, and the song took on a whole new life of its own. So it had its little pop culture moment there for a minute in 89, 90.
And it's definitely played a lot in baseball stadiums throughout the country.
And I guess it's been said that walkout music became big with baseball games. Like each player had a song that they would walk out to. You see it in like all kind of sporting events now, where it's like whenever they're walking out, they're going to have this distinct song play, but became popular here in Major League.
Yeah, and David Ward said that he thinks that this is what made it popular. And I mean, I don't remember from the 80s about walk-up songs, but I kind of feels like it tracks a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember there being like songs like the Cardinals had like The Heat Is On when they were rallying, but like I don't remember there being like a particular song for like a baseball player coming out in the 80s, but I don't know. Yeah. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Well, Major League premiered. It was a big hit. Audiences loved it. Critically, it wasn't panned. It wasn't like celebrated either. I do think over time it's been reevaluated, especially because so many movies have like copied off of Major League that this was still like, I don't think people realize how fresh of a movie this was at the time, mixing humor with a sports themed movie. Did really well at the box office. I mean, this movie cost $11 million to make. It made its money back the first weekend, essentially. It was also number one at the box office when it was released. Went on to gross $75 million, which doesn't sound like a lot now, but for a movie that didn't have huge names in it and was a sports movie and sports baseball movie, and those movies weren't doing really well, it did outgross Bull Durham, Natural, those movies, and did well enough to where they were like, hey, you know what? Let's make a sequel to this. And in 1994, there was a sequel to this, Major League 2. Seems like a really long stretch to go before putting out a sequel, especially for a movie that was a sort of a surprise hit. They didn't really strike quickly, because I remember by the time this came out in 94, like enough time had elapsed when 94 was like a big year for like a lot of big movies. Like the industry kind of changes and there was like bigger blockbusters, and it just didn't feel like a thing, you know. And none of those actors were like big names anymore, except for Wesley Snipes, and Wesley Snipes wasn't in it. So you have Major League 2 without the biggest star. And so I remember not liking it when it came out. For this episode, I did go back and we both watched Major League 2. And the only thing I can really say about it is like, it's when you watch it immediately, you're like, this was unnecessary. And David S. Ward, he came back as a director, though he didn't write it. And I think you can tell the difference in the writing, especially with like the Bob Uecker stuff. It's just not very funny. I don't know that anybody was really like curious, like what happened to these guys, and all the stories of what happened to them are not interesting. And pretty much the movie is just about like where everybody is now. Like Ricky Vaughn now is like rich and all worried about his image like Dorn was, except for Dorn now is like running the team, and Berenger seems just like going through the motions. You know, they want him to coach. Everything in it feels very pedestrian and like what you would do if you were like sat down to write Major League 2 and you're like, let's get out all of the ideas first that would be like everybody's initial thought, but they were just like, that's where they stopped. You know, it's not a funny movie, and I just didn't find it very entertaining. I'm sorry. I know it's terrible.
Sorry. Sorry, it was pretty funny. Sorry, I couldn't help but laugh at that. It felt uninspired. But it wasn't the fault of anyone that was in it. The movie overall felt uninspired. Strangely, for me, I ended up liking the third one a lot more, which is weird because that one's way more panned than the second one. That's Major League. Is it Major League 3?
No, they just call it Major League Back to the Minors. It's like, you know, it's a straight to video movie when there's like this sort of like semicolon, some long
and that extra, was 4 years later subtitle. In 98.
Yeah, 98. No, I'll be honest. I didn't even remember this movie coming out, but since we were doing this, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for it. And I couldn't agree with you more. I was sitting down to watch Major League Back to the Minors. I looked it up online. It was like an 8% on IMDb, and Rotten Tomatoes is a terrible score.
David Ward is like, it's not even a Major League movie.
Yeah, it's not. He didn't have anything to do with it, and the people that they do bring back are really small, have really small roles, and they're like the smaller characters in the first or second movie, and some of the newer characters that they picked up in part 2 they bring over to this one, and they're not. You know, it's them in the minor leagues. But I agree with you. I enjoyed this one more, and I think, don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a very good movie. I mean, it's nothing that I would recommend, like, hey, you need to go out and this is a gem that's been missed. But as far as, like, watching Major League 1, 2, and 3 together, the heart that was lacking in Major League 2, I think they went back and they're like, let's put some heart into this movie. Let's kind of go back to the first one where these guys are not doing really well, and Scott Bakula is like the aging baseball player that's like they're trying to bring him in and whip this team into shape. And, you know, you're going through some of the same motions, but I just felt like there was at least something to cheer for, whereas like part 2 felt a little cold and a little more cynical, and this one they were getting back to like what I loved. And even the Bob Uecker stuff in Back to the Minors, he was funnier than he was in part 2.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add to that because that's exactly how I felt about it, and went into that movie not thinking that I was gonna like it any more than I like to, but was totally surprised. Again, not an award winner, but if you are a completist like us, you know, just go ahead and watch them. There were aspects of the plot that were, I don't think they would ever happen, like a minor league, just a one-off of a minor league team going up and playing a major league team just because of a bet or whatever it was. But the ideas behind it were like, okay, This wasn't in the second one or the first one, but same kind of ideas behind it.
Well, let's stop there. We'll have some more final thoughts on Major League, but let's keep talking about baseball movies. Lindsay, tell me about your pick of the week, 8 Men Out.
I've never been first in line to watch historical movies, whether fictionalized or however true they might be, but 8 Men Out gets a total pass. In fact, because baseball is such a nostalgic pastime, it might be the best sport in which to take a dive into history. This was one of the darkest times in all of Major League Baseball. 8 players from the Chicago White Sox conspired with a few well-known gamblers to throw the 1919 World Series. I'd only ever heard of this story but never knew the nitty-gritty details. Even though this film is a dramatization of that time, from what I can find, it's pretty darn accurate. Any significant changes are due to the obvious. It's a film, not a novel. You've got to condense for time. But some facts are just plain undeniable and also painfully embarrassing. In 1919, the Sox were a shoo-in to win against the Cincinnati Reds. They'd won 88 games and lost 52, which put them at the top of the American League. Even if you were a first-time green gambler, betting on the White Sox would have been a no-brainer. But if you had sway to rig the series to bet on the Reds, odds are you'd be one of very few left counting your winnings. But how do you get professional baseball players to throw the World Series? In this case, it was a perfect storm, and a classic example of what happens when your workers, in this case the White Sox players, are undervalued and underappreciated by the team's owner, Charles Comiskey. Refusing to give your team raises, promised bonuses after they've been the best team in the American League, and poised to take the World Series, these guys might just take the bait for the right price. In this case, on top of the regular series pay, each of the 8 Sox players involved in this scandal stood to make $10,000 each if they threw the game. That's around $186,000 in 2024. Comiskey's cheapness also got the team an unfashionable nickname of the Chicago Black Sox. The slang name for the team was due to Comiskey's refusal to pay for the players' uniforms to be clean, leaving them to, 1, not have multiple uniforms, and 2, the players not wanting to or having time or money to pay for constant cleaning. 8 Men Out is based on a 1963 novel of the same name, and lucky for this production, the novel's writer, Elliot Asanoff, was on board to co-write the screenplay along with director John Sayles. Justin, I think you did one of Sayles' other films, Lone Star, as your pick of the week back in episode 76, and that movie is just as engrossing as this one. Manipulation, greed, respect, ego, inner emotional battles are all at the heart of this story. Should the Sox secretly stick it to Comiskey or keep the game honest, like what's assumed it'll always be as America's favorite pastime? You might be left with mixed emotions at the end of this film. Feelings on what's right and wrong can vary, but one thing's for sure. The spirit, the very essence of baseball, is what blows this unbelievable conspiracy. How the film portrays it, some co-conspirator Sox players begin to silently relent and start to play better. This leaves the pressure on Sox pitcher Eddie Sicott, played by David Strathern. I can't decide what's more painful, watching the Sox make obvious errors, botching plays, or Sicott being one of the last who stayed committed to the conspiracy by bungling plays or disgracing his stellar pitching record by throwing the worst meatballs of his life. Strathern knocks it out of the park, as usual, with his performance, and is one of many incredibly talented actors involved in the film. This cast is stacked, especially for 1988. The first conspiracy dissenter is Shoeless Joe Jackson, played by D.B. Sweeney, then Bucky Weaver, played by John Cusack. As of the first game, they already want to back out, as their involvement was more out of pressure. But once they know about the conspiracy, there's no official backing out once you're involved. If that's not disheartening enough, Sox manager Kid Gleason, played by John Mahoney, senses at his core that something fishy is going on. Mahoney's the really strong centering moral consciousness of the film. He's a great middleman between the unfaithful players and Comiskey's cheapness as the team's owner. Other faces you'll recognize are Major League's own Charlie Sheen as Happy Felsch, Michael Rooker as Chick Gandil, the ringleader of the conspiracy, Christopher Lloyd as a former baseball player, Bill Burns, who served as one of the middlemen between the players, and Arnold Rothstein, one of the biggest gambling conspirators and a really well-known crime boss, if that gives you any idea of how bad this could go if anyone backs out of the deal. Also look for a small part by Nancy Travis. She's one of the only female faces you're going to see in 8 Men Out. Although her role is small, she never knows how much of an emotional linchpin she played for her husband, Sox pitcher Lefty Williams, played by James Reed, and his decisions to commit to rigging the game. Much of the film is spent on the field and behind the scenes leading up to the World Series. The latter quarter of the movie concerns exposing the fix, the court case, and what happens to the 8 Sox players after being charged with conspiracy. The conclusion for these players and the scandal is filled with just as much uneasiness as fixing the World Series in the first place. It feels like director and co-screenwriter John Sayles really tried to keep integrity in the film, but also exposing the emotionality and conflicts behind everything. So if you think you could be into some serious major league seediness that's kind of wild, really, for the time, definitely check out 8 Men Out. Major League Baseball's Black Sox scandal is a tale that needed to be told, one of greed, but also one of baseball players, before they were the high-paid players of today, trying to stick it to the man. No matter what side you bet on, no one comes out a winner in the end.
Yeah, you're right. I did do Lone Star, and I agree. The Lone Star and 8 Men Out, I think, as far as like John Sayles' filmography goes, maybe his more accessible movies. You know, a lot of his movies are more like really deal in like economical issues, and aren't always like fully on board to entertain. They're tapping into some sort of like serious subject. But I like that these two movies, and they came out not terribly far apart, maybe like 6 or 7 years, but his hand at like a bigger budget and like a bigger scope of a movie.
Yeah, I like the way he tells the story. All right, Justin, it's your turn. Tell us about 61.
Yeah, again, I think it's pretty funny that we both chose baseball movies that were based on history. Mine is one of the few films that Billy Crystal was a director. He's a huge Yankees fan, and you can tell just throughout the film he was trying to handle this story with the utmost amount of respect and love. I'm not as familiar with the real-life story of Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris's race to beat Babe Ruth's single-season record of 60 home runs in one season. So in the year 1961, they're trying to hit 61 home runs. That's just like the general tip of the iceberg of this movie. What's really the big scope of the whole film is the relationship between Maris and Mantle. Roger Maris is played by Barry Pepper, who I absolutely loved in Saving Private Ryan and a few other films. I just like wonder what happened to Barry Pepper. I don't see him in a lot of stuff anymore. And watching him in this movie, I remembered how much I actually love him. He does such a great job of showing a man who's conflicted because he was from a small town and now he's like in the spotlight and he's got a wife and kids and he's trying to stay the straight and narrow, and he's like sort of like propelled in the fame because he's a really good player, but anytime there's a sports team, it always seems like there's only one room for like one star for the public eye or for the press to like focus in on. And this movie kind of shows that push and pull. Mickey Mantle is the star of the team. He's the leader of the team, but he's also kind of a train wreck. He's like been playing for a while. He treats his body like hell. He's like out drinking, womanizing, doesn't always have his mind on baseball. Pretty self-destructive guy. As his career starts going downhill, Maris's career starts going uphill, and they sort of cross paths, but they're both really excellent players, and the press sort of takes hold of Roger Maris and starts writing about him. They really show how much press kind of affects sports players. The press would write, Roger Maris or Mickey Mantle didn't sign this kid's baseball, or they walked off, and it's because they don't like kids, and the players are like, that's not how it happened. I had to run because I had to do this. But the press, starts pitting them against each other, starts pitting people against each other because it's sensationalized. And eventually, like, Roger Maris is getting, like, death threats from fans, and they're, like, throwing stuff at him at baseball games and booing him because they want Mickey, they think that the reason why Mickey Mantle is doing bad is because Roger Maris is a new star. And so there's a lot of that throughout the entire film. It never really feels long, though, because I like the drama off the baseball field. It's handled with a lot of care and a lot of dignity. At the same time, when they're actually playing baseball stuff, it's really great. Billy Crystal did a good job, especially with sounds, like the sounds of balls hitting the glove, the crack of the bat. It's really, really amplified, and it gets you into the game, especially when it's a story where you kind of, even if you don't know the history of what's happening, you kind of get what's going on. The only aspect of this movie, and I hadn't seen it since it came out, this movie came out like 2001. I just totally forgot about the opening in this movie. And at first it's interesting because it takes place in St. Louis, but I'd forgot how unbelievably cheesy it is. And, I forget what a connection Roger Maris had to St. Louis. He played for the Cardinals in 67 and 68 when they won the World Series. So just that in mind, it like kind of didn't bother me so much that the beginning was a little rough. But once you get into the movie, it just sucks you right in. And it's one of those movies that I would put it up there with like one of the best movies about baseball. I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. And it was a nice balance with a movie like Major League, which is really going for the laughs. All the baseball stuff in Major League is fun, but this one really went to a more like serious place with what the pressures that Major League players have while they're trying to maintain some particular image for the press and for the audiences, because they have sponsorships. If they crash their car because they're drunk, it's going to affect not only their job, but the entire team. It's something that I never really think about, and this is one of the few movies I thought that like kind of zoned in on one of those aspects of their life and, playing for the majors.
I still haven't seen this, but I do always respect when, and I think this lends itself to baseball movies, where a really big fan of the sport is the one behind the film in the director's chair, the one that wrote it. That said, sometimes that cheesiness is just going to happen because that love for the sport, can get cheesy, but I think when you love it so much, you kind of don't care.
The thing is like it was a made-for-cable movie, so it has a made-for-cable feel, so it kind of fits in with that vein, especially that time period when they were making cable movies like a lower budget. But yes, I totally agree with you. It's great when a fan of the sport is in charge of like, let's get this right, let's get the feeling of baseball. And 61 is currently streaming on Max, so you can catch it there if you want to check it out.
I was going to ask if it was an HBO movie.
It was an HBO movie, yeah. Well, that's our double play pick of the week. 61
sure
and 8 Men Out. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
If you've listened to over 100 Murray moments here on the podcast, you've probably heard a story or two about Billy and his lifelong love of baseball, in particular the Chicago Cubs. Now, even though we never know if the Berenger, Sheen-led Indians make it to the World Series because the finale is them winning their division, the guys finally did what so many bet against. And Bill's familiar with this concept. The Cubbies consistently struggled to make it to the playoffs, let alone the World Series. But in 2016, that would come to an end, and the Chicago Cubs would face none other than the Cleveland Indians, now known today as the Cleveland Guardians. Winning their first World Series in 108 years, the Cubs and the Indians really fought it out. This was a nail-biter of a series, 7 games back and forth, and Bill couldn't keep his enthusiasm, his want to share his excitement with anyone who'd listen, at bay. Bill was really on one in the days surrounding the series. On October 21st, the day before the Cubs win the league championships against the LA Dodgers, Bill finds himself in Washington, D.C., about ready to accept the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, but not before dropping in on President Obama at the White House to record a pretty cute promotion video for the Affordable Health Care Act. But Bill's not done at the White House. But before leaving, he makes a surprise pop-in the press conference room just as journalists are assembling for an actual official daily press conference. With only one game left to determine if the Cubs will move on to the World Series, Bill gets behind the podium without being asked and starts speaking to those in the room, making the prediction that the Cubs are going to make it to the series. The next day, the Cubs trample the Dodgers 5-0, sealing the deal and sending them to play the Cleveland Indians in the World Series. The night after, Bill's at the Kennedy Center accepting his aforementioned Mark Twain Award, and towards the end of his heartfelt speech, Bill brings it right back to baseball. I'm glad that they won last night so I could be here this evening because if they hadn't won last night, I would have had to have been there because honestly, I just don't trust the media to report the score accurately, he says to a laughing crowd who's there in his honor. It's game 1. the 2016 World Series, and it's good there are 7 games in the series because, and to quote Major League, the Indians win it. Oh my God, the Indians win it in a 6-0 victory. Oof, it's a rough start for the Cubs. Game 2, the Cubs come out on top 5-1. For baseball fans, when your team has made it this far, it's hard to relax. Baseball's a tense, contemplative sport that takes a lot of patience. Bill keeps his cool through the first 2 games, but then the man breaks his silence. For Game 3, Bill emerges over the loudspeaker at Chicago's Wrigley Field. It's the bottom of the 7th inning and the last chance to order a beer. But we didn't come here to drink beer. We came here to win this ball game, Bill said. And with that, he demands that the entire crowd, quote, spray it, don't say it, and begins, in the voice of Daffy Duck, whom he calls the greatest American entertainer, begins singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And the man belts it out, too. Absolutely nothing holding it back. It's so heartening to see him so engulfed in the baseball spirit. But unfortunately, the Cubbies lost this one. Game 4 is another rough one. The Indians triumph with a 6-2 victory. The series is now 3-1 Cleveland. One more win, and the Indians dash all of Chicago's dreams. At a post-game house party close by Wrigley, emotions are palpable during an impromptu acoustic guitar sing-along of The Wait. You know, that song by the band, like that defined kind of the late 60s generation. Leading this sing-along was Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder and Savant guitarist Derek Trucks. Bill shows up to the small house party and can be seen amongst the partygoers goading on the 2 rockers. As Trucks later explained how this happened, he was coming to town for Game 4, and he stayed in touch with Bill throughout the years after they'd met at Eric Clapton's Crossroads Festival. See episode 95 for more on that festival. Trucks ended up sitting with Vedder during Game 4, and just one thing led to another. I reached out to Bill and told him where we were hanging out. At 1:30 or 2 in the morning, he pops in, and it just got crazier and crazier, Trucks said. I had no intention of playing music at 3:30 in the morning across the street from Wrigley, but there it is. Next day, Game 5. The Cubs come back for a 3-2 win over the Indians, and Bill gets caught on the Jumbotron flexing his bicep underneath his Cubs jacket. Clearly he's pumped. Just like every other Cubs fan, no one's throwing in the towel just yet. Game 6 arrives, this time on the Indians' turf, and Bill's riding a high at this point. A Cubs fan who lives in Indiana, Karen Michael, reaps the benefits of Bill's random generosity in this moment. She'd watched 5 games from her house, then went to the Indians' Progressive Field with the hopes of scoring just one single ticket for Game 6. She'd been there a while and was about to give up, until Bill appeared out of nowhere in the crowd outside the stadium and said to her, here's a ticket. He just kind of shuffled me in the door, Karen said. I thought it was just a ticket to get in. But it wasn't just a ticket to get in. Karen got to sit a few rows behind home plate with Bill as they bonded over their childhoods, baseball, and of course the 9-3 win over Cleveland that ensured the Cubs' path to Game 7. The next night, the final game, November 2nd, Bill's with his son Luke, still on the Indians' home ground. Allegedly, at some point, Bill buys all of the Indians fans sitting directly behind him a round of beers. With a rain delay and an extra 10th inning later, after 108 years, the Cubs become the 2016 World Series champs in an 8-7 final score. And I remember this game. There was just so much anticipation and drama. And you can bet the cameras were on Bill at the exact moment of victory. The look on his face is nothing short of pure, honest joy, with his son Luke grabbing at his dad at the moment the Cubs clinched it. He's on a rampage of nothing but happiness after this. He's on local TV saying the city needs to cancel school for the rest of the week. He's reunited with Eddie Vedder on the field, along with well-known hardcore Cubs fans Bonnie Hunt and John Cusack. He's getting sprayed in the face with champagne by the Cubs president, getting doused by Cubs players. He's hugging everyone possible, fellow fans, strangers, and he even gets tapped to interview the players in the locker room. When asked by a Fox Sports reporter, how do you plan to celebrate back in Chicago? Bill says, I was thinking we should just go around and pick up all the bottles and cans in the parks, but that'd be taking jobs away from people. So, I suppose, I don't know. I think the best thing to do is just go jump in the lake. And he means Lake Michigan that borders Chicago. That's what my mom used to say to me whenever I'd act like an idiot. Oh, just go jump in the lake, Bill. We're all going to act like idiots for a day or so. Then I think we should all just go jump in the lake. Maybe at dawn, this morning. Everyone, go jump in the lake. For the next couple days.
It was almost like 3 Murray moments mixed into one. I wanted to hear more about the fan that got to sit with Bill Murray in the stands.
I know I could have done that, but I mean, maybe I will. I probably will at some point.
I always love that when like a city just unites out of a championship game. we've had that here in St. Louis multiple times, and I was watching the Cubs series, and I don't follow baseball hardly, but anytime you see one of these teams that hasn't won in forever, like I watched the White Sox game when that happened and the Red Sox game, and it is always fun to get caught up in the excitement and just be silly. Well, thank you for that Murray moment.
Of course.
Before we close things out on Major League, do we have any final thoughts that we want to get out?
Yeah, a couple little things. Jeremy Piven was cut completely out of this movie. He had somewhat of a, not big supporting role, but he was, all of his scenes are him yelling insults at the opposing team of the Indians.
Which I see that.
Yeah, totally Jeremy Piven, but it just didn't work. So all of his scenes were cut out. Let's see. Rene Russo. Early on in her acting career, the director needed to, this is what she says. She had to have her hands tied down because she was being too Italian and speaking with her hands a lot, and they actually had to physically tie her hands down in the first scene that we see with she and Tom Berenger meeting in the restaurant. I love watching that scene now and knowing that and like looking for it, but you can't tell. And there's also a wedding that is completely cut out where Rene Russo's about to marry the douchebag that we see, and Berenger and the whole team. I don't think it's like a scene from The Graduate or anything, but like they go to break up the wedding.
I'm glad that didn't make the final cut.
I wish it was still a deleted scene, though. I'd like to see it. Anyway, Justin, do you have any final thoughts?
I didn't really have any final thoughts necessarily, or like behind the scenes stuff. I feel like we got most of that out, but just a general love of this movie. It hasn't faded out whatsoever. If anything, I appreciate it even more because I just feel like there's like a lack of like comedic sports films anymore. Just seems like a bygone era. I mean, there's still the series Ted Lasso, which is really funny. There's a lot of dramatic stuff in that. So that's probably the closest thing that I've seen that touches Major League, if not like completely lifts things directly from the film itself. But I just kind of miss this type of movie where we get a really fun, inspirational sports movie, but then loaded with humor and also some like, kind of a little bit dirty humor. It's like not like family-friendly humor.
I think I've already mentioned that I play softball. Major League comes up, a quote, somebody throws it out every now and again, and it always warms my heart when that happens. And just maybe like 2 games ago, I was playing second and did a Willie Mays Hayes basket catch, and you're not supposed to catch balls like that. You can, but frequently it gets bobbled, and I caught it and ended that inning, and the first thing I said was, coming off the field, was, "Nice catch. Don't fucking do it again."
And one final thing I'll say, not on Major League, but just in general, I've been watching just tons of baseball movies. It's just like coincidentally had just watched Angels in the Outfield and was just kind of like blown away by like the cast of this, just silly 1994 remake of a 60s movie, kids film. And one of our mutual podcast friends, Doug, he made a Facebook post about this, just talking about like how stacked this cast is. And it totally is. It's just, it's kind of crazy. It's like Danny Glover, Tony Danza, Christopher Lloyd, Ben Johnson, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Adrian Brody, Matthew McConaughey. Just a crazy big cast, and all like much younger. It's like movies like 30 years old. So some of them are like just starting out, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's the little kid in it. But it was just kind of wild, and actually a really fun, real good family-friendly movie if you're looking for something to throw on this summer for the kids. Angels in the Outfield, not one of those movies that's like, pushing God.
It's not that.
It's not trying to save anybody. It's just a fun movie, kind of like Preacher's Wife. Just more fun than Preacher's Wife, but in that same vein.
Yeah, I do like that movie. It's been maybe like 15 years since I've seen it, but I remember watching it being like, all right, that was still a sweet little movie.
I watched that in Rookie of the Year almost back to back, and I think I liked Angels in the Outfield a little bit more.
I used to watch Rookie of the Year all the time.
It's a silly one, but it's again fun.
When you're that age though, that was like, I can do that.
Yeah.
I don't have to break my arm.
I just need to get a weird thing to happen to my
Like a whip
tendons
arm.
tighten up. Yeah. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our episode on Major League. Next month, I'm very ecstatic that we'll be doing Arachnophobia, a creepy, crawly bug movie for the end of the summer. Just seems so perfect. And that's just one of those movies I always forget how much fun it is. And that movie's just like a comfort blanket to me. It's just like curling up and throwing on Arachnophobia. It's just going to be a good afternoon.
A comfort blanket filled with spiders.
Yeah, filled with spiders. It's a good.
It makes me crawl, but man, I love watching that movie. It's like the epitome of watching something scary for fun. That's like exhilarating.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably talk about a lot of other bug movies. We'll probably try to theme it out for that one.
Yeah,
seems appropriate.
Good idea.
So something to look forward to. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reber.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, guys.